The sharp sound of claws scraping against the polished marble floors echoed down the quiet hallway of the courthouse. Officer Jack Turner's teeth clenched as his 85-pound German Shepherd partner, Max, yanked hard on the leash, his entire body straining forward with a wild, untamed determination. "Max, heel," Jack hissed under his breath, trying to regain control. But the command might as well have been spoken into the wind. Max had always obeyed, always. For 4 years they had worked side by side as part of the courthouse's canine security unit. Max was disciplined, focused, and fiercely loyal. His presence was reliable, unwavering, and predictable. But this was something entirely different. Something Jack couldn't understand, nor could he explain. Jack stumbled slightly as Max barreled ahead, his claws echoing louder down the otherwise silent corridor. A few attorneys by the elevator turned, their conversations abruptly cutting short as they stared in confusion. One clerk, arms full of paperwork, froze mid-step, eyes wide, her focus entirely on the dog. Near the entrance, a security officer glanced up from his post, his hand drifting toward the radio, but he didn't press the button. He just stared, unsure whether to intervene or simply watch as this unusual scene unfolded. The hallway stretched out longer than Jack remembered. Each step Max took seemed to carry more weight, more urgency. Jack's boots slid slightly against the slick marble floor, struggling to keep up as the dog surged forward with a sense of purpose. Max's ears were perked, his eyes locked on something Jack couldn't see. His body was rigid, every muscle taut with intention. It was as if some invisible force was pulling Max toward a destination only he could sense, some unseen goal that had ignited his instincts in a way Jack had never witnessed before. This wasn't about a threat. There was no sign of an intruder, no need for a search or alert. Max wasn't barking or posturing. He was focused urgently, silently, desperately. As they neared the double doors of the courtroom, Jack's stomach clenched. Something wasn't right. Something was happening. And Max wasn't going to stop until they reached the source. Jack Turner had seen Max in action countless times. They had swept courtrooms before major trials, conducted searches of vehicles for hidden threats, and even trained alongside SWAT units in high-pressure simulations. Max was as by the book as they came. He never broke protocol. He never strayed from the mission. That was why he was one of the most trusted canine officers in the entire county, which made today's behavior completely inexplicable. Jack replayed the events of the morning in his head. Max had been restless the moment they pulled into the courthouse parking lot. He started whining in the backseat, low, uneasy sounds that Jack hadn't heard since Max's early training days. At first, Jack dismissed it. Maybe it was just the scent of food from the plaza or the sound of bustling crowds nearby. But then, as they drove past the courthouse building, Max leapt toward the window, pawing desperately, nearly knocking himself out of his harness. That wasn't just alert behavior. That was panic. That was urgency. So Jack did what every good handler learns to do eventually. He trusted the dog. He circled back and parked the car. The moment Jack opened the rear door, Max didn't wait. He bolted out, his body stiff with focus, sniffing the air, moving with a purpose Jack couldn't quite grasp. Jack barely clipped the leash on him before Max charged toward the courthouse entrance, weaving through the security line, ignoring all noise, scents, and distractions. Inside the courthouse, things escalated quickly. Max's breathing became quicker, his movements sharper. Jack could feel the shift in the air as the dog's focus honed in on something. He wasn't tracking anything familiar like gunpowder or narcotics. This was different. Max wasn't just searching for a threat. He was following something instinctual, something only his heart could recognize, something urgent, something human. Jack called out again, "Max, stop." But Max didn't even slow down. He pulled harder on the leash, guided not only by scent but by an instinct Jack no longer questioned. They weren't just going somewhere, they were being led. Inside the courtroom, everything was still. The air was thick with the quiet tension that accompanied custody hearings. Judge Susan Miller, composed and dignified in her early 60s, sat elevated behind the bench, gavel resting gently in her hand as attorneys presented their cases. Near the front, Emma Parker, a thin, solemn 9-year-old girl with long brown hair, sat rigidly beside her caseworker. She didn't fidget. She didn't look around. She was too still, too quiet for a child her age. Emma had been in and out of foster care since her mother died 3 years earlier. Her father was incarcerated, and no one had ever stayed long enough to give her a place to call home. Today was supposed to decide her future, whether she would be moved again or finally adopted by the Walkers, a couple who had been meeting with her for several weeks. And then it happened. The heavy courtroom doors at the back of the room burst open, crashing against the walls with a jolt that startled everyone. Conversations halted. A defense attorney dropped his notepad in surprise. Even Judge Miller paused mid-sentence, the gavel frozen just inches above the bench. All eyes turned toward the entrance as Max charged in, dragging Jack behind him, his paws pounding loudly on the floor. "Apologies. Sorry." Jack stammered, his voice breathless, red-faced from exertion. Judge Miller narrowed her eyes, visibly irritated. "Officer Turner, please remove your dog from this courtroom immediately," she ordered sternly. But Max had already lunged forward, as if drawn by an invisible thread. He veered sharply, bypassing the gallery of people and heading straight for the judge's bench. With one last determined pull, Max broke free from Jack's grasp and slipped beneath the large wooden platform where Judge Miller sat, her face frozen in shock. "Max!" Jack called out, rushing forward, confusion and concern flooding his voice. Everyone stared. Even Emma, her eyes wide, turned her gaze to the dog, her expression flickering with something: curiosity? Hope? No one could be sure, but there was a shift in the room. Now, the courtroom had fallen into complete silence. No whispers. No movement. Just wide eyes and held breaths. Jack dropped to his knees beside the bench, peering into the narrow, shadowy space beneath. At first, he saw nothing. The shadows were thick, and the space under the bench was tight. Jack leaned in, squinting, trying to figure out what Max was reacting to. And then he noticed it. Max's posture changed. The German Shepherd went still, crouching low to the ground, his head tilted to one side. His nose inched forward, slow and deliberate. Jack's eyes followed the dog's movements, and that's when he saw her, curled into the far corner, huddled. Against the wall was a tiny girl, no more than 3 years old. Her cheeks were streaked with dirt and tears, her light jacket twisted around her like a makeshift blanket. Her arms were tightly wrapped around a stuffed rabbit with worn-out ears. Max stopped just short of touching her. He lay down, flattening himself to the floor, inching forward with the kind of gentleness only a dog could muster. Max let out a soft whine, part greeting, part reassurance. Jack's voice caught in his throat. The little girl, Emily, looked up slowly. Her eyes were wide and glassy. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She just blinked up at the dog and the man kneeling beside her. "It's okay," Jack whispered gently, his voice soft, trying to reassure her. "You're safe now." Slowly, Jack reached out, his hand trembling. The little girl hesitated for a moment before taking one tiny step forward. Her small shoes shuffled in the darkness until she was fully visible beneath the bright lights of the courtroom. She reached out and clutched Max's fur like it was the only safe thing in the world. Gasps rippled through the room. That's when Jack heard someone whisper behind him. "Her name's Emily. She's been missing for over 3 hours. And?" Just like that, The courtroom changed. Terrified soul, yes, but also to hold broken, frightened part of herself that still remembered what it felt like to have no one. She clung to Emily as much as Emily clung to her. And as shedded, Emma felt her own tears rise without warning, hot and unstoppable, spilling down her cheeks before she even realized they had come. Tears she hadn't cried in years. Tears she didn't know she still carried. They sat there together on the polished courtroom floor. Two children from different stories now held together by something invisible and unspoken. Emily's breathing slowed, her grip on Max relaxed. Her other hand reached toward the stuffed rabbit lying beside her. And then gently she leaned into Emma single quotes SSHOULDER ... from behind the bench. Judge Miller blinked hard, her fingers tightening on the gavel in her lap. It was a courtroom, but right then it didn't feel like one. It felt like healing. 4 years, Judge Susan. Miller had believed that experience would shield her from emotion. That wisdom came from detachment. But as she sat behind the bench, gavel now resting idle in her hand, she realized just how wrong she had been. She couldn't take her eyes off the scene. Before her, Emma, barely 9, sitting cross-legged on the cold courtroom floor, arms wrapped protectively around a 3-year-old girl she had never met before today. No hesitation, no questions, just instinct, just heart. And Emily, fragile and trembling, no longer hiding, no longer afraid, not because of anything the system had done, not because of any court order or social worker plan, but because one child, another child who understood pain, had stepped up and said, "You're not alone." Susan had seen too many children close themselves off, become silent, numb, hardened. But Emma still chose to feel. She still chose kindness even after everything. And suddenly the pages in Emma's file, the reports, the checkboxes, the evaluations felt small, incomplete. They couldn't capture what Susan had just witnessed. They never could. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was a calling. Judge Miller looked over at the Walkers, the couple sitting silently at the back of the room, hands clasped, eyes wet. She could see the shift in them, too. The moment they no longer saw Emma as a girl waiting for a home, but as someone already becoming part of theirs. Susan took a long breath. The courtroom was still silent, but something unspoken had passed through everyone there. She didn't need more time. She didn't need more testimony. She had seen enough. Sometimes she thought the law needed to listen to the heart. The courtrooms returned to order, but something fundamental had shifted. Emily had been safely taken into the care of her grandmother, who had arrived moments after the discovery, tearful and overwhelmed with gratitude. Officers and court staff gently guided them into aqueous room, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost sacred. When Judge Miller reconvened the session, her tone was noticeably softer. The courtroom hadn't just witnessed a disruption. It had witnessed something redemptive. Allies turned toward Emma, who now sat beside her caseworker again. Her small shoulders were squared, her hands folded in her lap, but her eyes were different. There was a quiet strength there now, one that hadn't been earned in a classroom or therapy session, but an element of raw humanity. Across the aisle, the Walkers watched her closely. They had come to court that morning with uncertainty. Emma's file, like so many others, had painted a cautious picture, emotionally guarded, introverted, maybe even withdrawn. There were notes from social workers warning off difficulty connecting and trust issues. And yes, there had been losses, deep, scarring ones. But nothing in that file could have prepared them for the girl they saw today. They hadn't just seen a child. They had seen resilience. They had seen compassion. They had seen a girl who, when no one told her to, offered protection to a stranger. A girl who instinctively knew how to comfort Beckos she had once needed comforting too. And in that moment, there was no more doubt, no more waiting. Mr. Walker leaned toward his wife and whispered, "She's the one. She's ours," and just like that, Emma Parker's life began toe shift from a case number in a folder Tossamian finally undeniably wanted. 3 weeks later, the air inside the same courtroom felt different. There was no tension, no waiting for rulings, nozzlings heavy with uncertainty. Instead, there was warmth, laughter, the quiet hum of joy trying its best to stay composed in a room once known only for heartbreak. It was Emma Parker's adoption date. She wore a pale blue dress and the thin silver bracelet that had once belonged to her mother, something her caseworker had kept safely this time. Her brown hair was brushed neatly, but her eyes were bright in a way no one had seen before. At the request of Judge Susan Miller, both Officer Jack Turner and Max had returned for the ceremony. When Emma walked to the front of the room to sign her new name, Emma Walker, Max was already sitting beside the table. Hal looked up at her, tail thumping, quietly against the polished floor as if he understood exactly what was happening. She knelt down beside him before signing, burying her face into his thick fur, whispering something no one else could hear. Max simply leaned into her, steady and still. As Emma straightened up and picked up the pen, Judge Miller smiled. "Emma, you?" Reminded us that sometimes the strongest hearts affect quietest ones. "Thank you," she sagely. Emma smiled back, one of those rare, full smiles that showed in the eyes, and carefully signed her name. Behind her, the Walkers stood with tears in their eyes. No longer strangers, no longer visitors, just home. And as Max sat beside her, proud and calm, Emma placed one hand on his back and looked around the room. This courtroom that had once felt so big, so cold, so far from safe, now it felt like hers, because now finally she belonged.